Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this COVID conversation this morning, where we're going to be talking about sleep and performance during COVID and even post-COVID now, as many of us exit the lockdown period. So just before we get started, my name is Ian Dunican. I'm an Adjunct Associate Professor at ECU, also hold an Adjunct Senior Research Fellow position at UWA, but primarily my job involves consulting with many businesses such as mining, oil and gas and rail, high-risk industries, but also with elite athletes as well, such as the Australian Institute of Sport, Super Rugby, Formula One, where we work on the areas of sleep and human performance. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping points today. So obviously, thank you very much for making your time available wherever you are today. ECU respectfully acknowledges the past and present traditional custodians of this land on which we are meeting, the Noongar elders and people. So also as well, we got some Q&A that we can take in this session. So I will just ask people to post the questions into the chat to the side. We'll answer those at the end of the presentation. So we're not going to answer those as we go through. We'll leave them till the very end. And also as well, don't divulge any personal case scenarios around sleep. You know, we can maybe answer them separately and provide some information. And a link will be made at the end of the recording as well, so you can re-watch it as well. And I'm happy as well to take email questions afterwards if I have the time to provide some additional context on it. But I will provide some resources at the end as well. Okay, so we will get into it. If I can work on my technology. Okay, so today, the importance of sleep and physical fitness to your mental health during and post COVID-19. So today we're going to talk about a few of these things, basics of sleep science, we'll talk about light exposure, work hours and some rules, work environments, physical and mental health, alcohol and caffeine, family and lifestyle, and then some resources as well. So even though we're talking about sleep today, and obviously sleep generally happens for most people overnight, with the exception of shift workers and people doing extraordinary hours, but really your sleep is just as much about what you do during the day and your activity as it is what you do at night as well. So we operate in this 24-hour cycle. Just a little bit of background about me. As I said at the start, with Melius Consulting, we're a consultancy-based company based here in Perth. We do work across Australia and anywhere in the world, really. So it's basically a specialised company, primarily kind of boffins in the health area around, you know, PhDs or medical doctors. So myself and our associates work in this area. Also have Sleep for Performance, and Sleep for Performance is a free online platform that anybody can access. That's not a paid platform, and this basically has free blogs. There's a podcast with 70 odd episodes, free downloads like some books on there as well, monthly newsletters as well, and yeah, plenty of free information there as well. And finally then, as I said before, I have positions at UWA, Centre for Sleep Science, and at Edith Cowan as well, so two of those adjunct positions. And so this allows me then to work with PhD students or collaborate on research or work on specific problems as well. To give you an idea from our industrial side who we work with, you can see here on the logos, many of these will be familiar to many of you out there. So particularly it's primarily or predominantly around mining, oil and gas and rail, so it's high-risk industries where we work around areas of human performance, fatigue risk management and aspects of occupational health and performance. And then primarily on the sports side, it's made about sleep and human performance where we work. And as you can see there, a number of different organizations. My personal interest is in around combat sports, and I've done a fair bit of research in that area as well. And most recently then in Formula One last year as well. Okay, so we'll get into the first part, the basics of sleep science. So humans were never designed to work at night. We were always meant to basically sleep when it was dark and be awake and operating during the day. We're what's called diurnal animals. So as much as we try, we can never basically flip our body clocks to become night people. Some people will say they've adapted to working nights. You never can truly fully adapt to working night and sleeping during the day. It's just not physiologically possible. And what's happened over time is from the invention of electricity and a number of different industrial things, we've been able to light up the night, which then has allowed to not only an industrial revolution, but now in the last 20 years, technological revolution. And even in my young days of of working, I've seen a massive change in terms of working hours and our ability to basically be plugged in 24/7, your ability to work from anywhere. And even in the last few months, we've seen an increase in this where people can work, remotely as well, which is great in some aspects as well. But on the negative side is where we can be basically plugged in 24/7, whether it be for work or even social media. And so we've gone from this on the left to basically, sleeping and operating by the cycles of the earth, to here on the right, where we can basically do whatever we want whenever we want, and we can use artificial light here to keep us basically stimulated and alert and awake at night. So we'll talk about some of those things as we go through. So why do we sleep? We're still not fully informed really of why we need sleep. There's no true one reason or root cause of why humans need sleep, but we know from a lot of sleep restriction studies or sleep deprivation studies, or basically longitudinal studies, that we need sleep to restore and rejuvenate, to grow muscles so we repair and regrow overnight. It also helps with hormones and conservation of energy as well. So it's important for a number of different reasons. Now there is a recommended sleep duration, and many people will say the older we get, the less sleep we need. Now that's true to a certain extent, but I think people have this idea that, once they get into their 40s, they need 4 hours of sleep at night, which is not actually true. If we look at this graph here, or this figure from the National Sleep Foundation in the US, which is a nice way of depicting it. If you look here from newborns on the left, all the way through to adults and older adults, there is a decline in sleep. But what you will notice is that from a young adult of 18, 7 to 9 hours, 7 to 9 hours, and then 7 to 8 hours for an older adult. So it's still really the same amount of sleep that we need from the age of 18 right through till the day we die. So you don't have this big drop off. I need 7 to 9. Now all of a sudden I got on to 4 hours. You still need it. Now what you can see in here in the outer boxes is maybe appropriate, and that's really important because not everybody's going to sleep exactly the same. And so when we look at the data around it, 95% of humans will require somewhere between 7 to 9 hours per night. 2.5% generally require less, but also 5.5% may require more. And so it's really interesting because most people you meet say, I get by on only 6 hours of sleep a night, and I just do fine. I must be in this, minority. But when everybody tells you they're in the minority, by definition, they're not in the minority. So what we find is that basically from, work and extracurricular activities, that people generally aren't making enough time for sleep. And we've seen this over a number of reports here in Australia over the last 10 years from Deloitte Access Economics and the Australasian Sleep Health Foundation. Sorry, the Australasian Sleep Association and the Sleep Health Foundation, where people basically have declining levels of sleep, in this country, which leads to a number of negative outcomes, which we can talk about later on. But in general, most people need 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Now, as you get older, sleep will change. So when you're in this sort of 0 to 13-year-old kind of grouping, in general, most people are going to be what's called a lark. You like to go to bed early and get up early. So kids will be up at 6 o'clock in the morning running around. And then when you become a teenager, it becomes quite the opposite. You become an owl. You go to bed late and get up late. Now, teenagers don't do this just to annoy you or piss you off really over time. What they're doing this for, the reason is because this is how they're designed. So if we all remember back to when we were teenagers, we found it hard to get up really early. And even some of us still, maybe in our early 20s, still feel like this. And in actual fact, probably about 30% of adults will still be more like an owl chronotype. So we generally see 3 types of chronotypes. We see larks, those who like to get up early and go to bed early. Intermediates, kind of those who go to bed around 11 and get up at 7. And then we see the last group being the owls, those who like to go to bed late and get up late. And it's roughly, basically broken into 30-odd% for each one of those. So kind of an even distribution across society. Now, what regulates sleep is something what's called a circadian rhythm, which you may have heard about before, often referred to as, the body clock as well. So people say my body clock is off, my circadian rhythms are all, jumbled up, and this is what they're talking about. Circa coming from the Latin word meaning about, and dia meaning a day, so it's about a day, circadian system, circadian rhythm. And this is all actually controlled from this little group of cells in here called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which people call the SCN for short. And that's that little small green dot there on this graph, and this sits at the base of the hypothalamus, and this is responsible for the regulation of light and dark. The regulation of your circadian system, taking its cues from light and dark cycles. So when light hits the optic nerve and the receptors in the eye, comes through, sends a signal to the SCN, which sends a signal to the pineal gland not to make melatonin or secrete melatonin. And you can see here, this is like during the day. So basically, you're not going to fall asleep. And then in the absence of natural light, we see it sends that signal or feedback loop saying basically, to produce melatonin. So this is why most people produce melatonin in the evening, and then, basically sleep at night. And this is the normal 24-hour kind of rhythm of what humans follow. So everybody operates like this. You might see a shift of this curve here, left and right, slightly depending on the chronotype, which I spoke about beforehand. And you might see some adaptation for people who do permanent night shift, but you're not going to see a complete flip of these things basically being reversed. Nobody can do this no matter how much they train themselves to do it. So sleep is regulated by two drivers as well. So the circadian system, which we spoke about before, but also the homeostatic system. This is the drive for sleep. So when you have a high homeostatic drive for sleep and low circadian system, that equals basically sleep onset. So we can see then over time here on the x-axis, for example, 10 o'clock at night till 6 o'clock in the morning. Once that circadian dip is there and the homeostatic drive for sleep is high, then we sleep. That reduces that drive for sleep, and then we're coming out of circadian rhythm, and we're basically alert and awake during the day. And this is basically what keeps happening over a 24-hour cycle, 48, 72, and so on and so on. And so, and when we do shift work or odd hours, this is what becomes disrupted. Now, if we didn't sleep here during this period, that drive for sleep would continue. So there's no way to shortcut that system. You can take medication to promote alertness, but basically the body will need sleep, and that homeostatic drive for sleep will keep increasing, and this circadian system will keep oscillating over a 24-hour period and continue along. Now, when we do sleep, there's a number of stages of sleep that we go through, which many of you may have heard about before. We've got rapid eye movement, which is responsible for about 25% of the night's sleep period. So rapid eye movement is dreaming sleep, and this is really important for psychological repair. So basically, rebooting the brain overnight. It's really good for cognitive performance and memory. So we know in studies where we deprive people of REM sleep, basically the next day, executive decision making, cognitive function can be impaired. And likewise with non-rapid eye movement, this is really important for physical repair and recovery. So this is when growth hormone and testosterone and so on is released in the body. Now, if you look at this graph, you will see with time on the x-axis that people go through different stages of sleep throughout the night. So it's not kind of like we do a block of, stage 1, then block of stage 2. The body actually oscillates in and out of these stages of sleep over time, and they're all different. They're all required for different reasons, as we said. Now, a lot of people will call REM sleep deep sleep. That's actually not true. REM sleep is very similar to wakefulness, as you can see up here. So the depth of sleep is basically on the graph here. Stage 3 is what's called deep sleep. So dreaming sleep is not deep sleep, and this is a common mistake that people say. Now, you will oscillate in and out of these different stages, as I said, and you may have some awakenings overnight as well, which are completely normal. It's a bit like a submarine. You has to come up and have a little periscope and look around. These awakenings may be more frequent when you're in a new environment, such as a hotel, or you're traveling, and they may be more frequent as well when you're experiencing shift work disorder or jet lag as well. But basically, this is how most people sleep across the night. So you got 25% in rapid eye movement and about 75% in non-rapid eye movement. So you can see that the non-rapid eye movement takes up most of the night. Now, in general, most of the non-rapid eye movement sleep occurs in the first half of the night, and most of the rapid eye movement then occurs in the second half of the night. So when we hit sort of 3 to 6 o'clock in the morning, this is when REM sleep is needed, and this is why when you are working or awake at that time, you feel so groggy because you've got that homeostatic drive for sleep has increased, so the need for sleep, you're in the circadian low, and it's basically the time where you need to get this kind of psychological repair and reboot. In the absence of sleep, or when you do go to sleep, the body will always prioritize REM sleep. This can often be referred to as REM rebound when people have been deprived of sleep for a long period of time. Now, there is a number of sleep disorders and problems in Australia. Recent data from Deloitte Access Economics and the Sleep Health Foundation indicate that about 4 in every 10 Australians experience some form of inadequate sleep. So that's basically either having a sleep disorder or sleep problem, whether it be transient or not getting enough sleep per night due to scheduling or other needs. When we talk about sleep problems and specifically sleep disorders, there's over 70 classified sleep disorders. So most people just think there's like 1 or 2 sleep disorders, over 70, according to the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, which most of the world follows. The most prevalent being obstructive sleep apnea, followed by insomnia, and then periodic limb movement disorder or restless legs during the day. So obstructive sleep apnea is basically a cessation of breathing overnight and is generally linked to body mass. So basically, the bigger you are, the more chance you have of developing sleep apnea. And every time you have a sleep apnea episode or a hypopnea or an awakening, it leads to an awakening. And so people may have 15 to 30 of those per hour overnight. So it's these constant awakenings and disruption of sleep. So even though somebody might go to bed for 8 hours, they may only be sleeping for 6 hours because they keep waking up. We've also got insomnia, which many people will be familiar with. You got sleep onset insomnia, so falling asleep, sleep maintenance, staying asleep, and then early morning insomnia as well. Now, you can have transient insomnia. We all get a bad night's sleep every now and then, and that's completely normal. But it's when you have this for weeks and months on end where you cannot fall asleep. A lot of insomnia is actually treated by cognitive behavioral therapy, and a lot of insomnia has actually got to do with what people are doing during the day. So if people are having naps, consuming excess caffeine or alcohol, all of these daytime activities can actually affect insomnia as well. And sleep disorders affect about 22% of the population, or 1 in 5. So it's quite interesting, and it's actually increasing in Australia. It's getting worse, and the one that's getting worse is basically OSA. Because basically we're getting bigger as a society, and there's lots of data in the US showing this as well, as basically the heavier we're getting, the more prevalent these sleep disorders are. You look at light exposure. During this COVID period, particularly a lot of people working at home, we've had to make makeshift offices in different rooms. We've been all kind of bungled into sitting rooms, living rooms, bedrooms, spare rooms, garages. I've seen all sorts of offices pop up, and I'm sure many people have. And so what happens is many people will not get enough natural light during the day. And it's really important if we talk about that SCN back in that graph earlier on about circadian rhythms, because we need natural light to help synchronize our body clock throughout the day. And it's really important as a timing and synchronizer. So if anybody's having trouble with basically any aspect of sleep, one of the best things you can do is actually expose yourself to early morning sunlight. So when you wake up first thing, maybe walking down to the coffee shop, whatever it might be, going out for a 20-minute walk, half an hour, without any sunglasses on, the more natural light exposure you can get in the morning, the better it's going to be for the timing of your sleep and wake patterns. As I said, sleep is not just about what we do at night, it's what we do during the day. And that exposure to natural light in the morning has also been shown to reduce afternoon sleepiness. So if you are quite prone to getting sleepy after lunch, it could be due to a number of factors: not enough sleep, maybe eating too much as well, not being around natural light, and basically being inactive as well. So you're kind of going to kill a few birds there with one stone if you do get up and go for a bit of a walk and get some natural sunlight, because it's going to get you up moving around, and it's going to help with your sleep and wake patterns, and it'll have only a positive influence. And natural light also helps with mental health. So we've seen an increase in mental health awareness in this country, and I think this week is Men's Health Awareness Week, so it's kind of topical as well, that we can improve our mental health through sleep as well. So there's a big relationship with that, which we'll show on some data. Now, light, whilst it's important during the day for regulation of sleep and wake, it's also important at nighttime when you sleep, because bright light in your environment can signal to keep you alert. So we look back at our guy in the first slide, tapping away on his laptop, And so if you are one of these people who in the evening, after you put the kids to bed and you've had dinner, you put the kids to bed and you sit down and you turn on Netflix or another show in the background, you pop up on your lap to catch up on some emails. Well, basically having all this bright light, plus the activity is going to stimulate you and basically increase cortisol, the stress hormone, and delay that onset of melatonin at night. So you're basically going to keep delaying the time you fall asleep. So the more bright light signals our brains to stay alert. So we haven't fully adapted as humans to electric lights in the last 150 years, unfortunately. The other thing as well that kind of annoys people is these standby lights in the rooms. So you'll have like clock radios or TV lights. If you're traveling, this is a common issue. We got these standby lights. So when we work with a lot of people who travel, we tell them to bring some tape where they can just tape over these lights and eliminate the sources, because sometimes these things are hardwired in. And for shift workers, particularly those in mining, oil and gas, we recommend blocking out the light coming in from the windows if they're doing shift work. And this can be really easily done with aluminium foil. So a roll of aluminium foil you get in the supermarket, basically if you just wet the back of that and put it to a window, it'll actually form a perfect seal and block out the light. Now, I'll be careful with that, because I recommended that to an elite combat sports athlete a few years ago who was training for the Olympics, because he was training very late at night and wanted to sleep in the morning to increase his sleep. And he got a knock on the door from the police. They thought he was running some sort of meth lab in his apartment because he had aluminium foil all over his windows. So make sure that you don't get a knock on the door from the police, because it does look a bit dodgy. But it's very helpful in blocking out all the light. So let's look at work hours. So when we're working at home during this COVID period, and maybe from now on, we might be working at home more and more. And maybe who knows what might happen in the future. Maybe the days of the office might be gone. Working at home is not always glamorous, and the division between work and home life can be blurred, as we've seen. It does have its perks, but it can be also difficult as well, because we don't drag ourselves away from the laptop or the computer, or we don't feel like there's a division between home and work. If we're traveling to an office, sometimes it kind of gives that mental divide, but sometimes working at home, we don't have that. And then we have maybe people or leaders scheduling meetings at irregular times. So I would suggest to people in teams, maybe if you are working remotely, to set some specific time for meetings. So, as an example, you could have just meetings between 9 and 12 every morning. That's going to be the meeting time. Outside of that as work time, but you're also allowing people time for exercise, movement, and so on. Because when we're working at home, you're probably going to have more periods of inactivity. So it could be argued that we need more shorter breaks and frequent breaks and shorter breaks to be able to get up and move around and get out of the house. So you might want to think about those if you are in a team, about some team rules around that, and setting some boundaries there as well. Because I know some companies we've been working with have been working like into the evening, a lot of evenings, and it just basically gives people, doesn't give them a break basically away from it, and then just impacts on their sleep and wake at night. And be mindful as well. I think that people are trying to cope with a lot of other stresses, so it's not as simple as just working from home. A lot of people are trying to homeschool at the same time. They've got other activities occurring as well, so we need to be mindful of that. And I think the team rules, if you all kind of sit down and put all your inputs and variables into that, be quite good to have a set of those rules that you can work by. So it allows everybody the flexibility of working from home as well. So interesting data that came out recently was that 31% of women with full-time jobs and families said they had to do more during the COVID lockdown, which is quite interesting. And 13% of working men with families said the same. Women were disproportionately feeling overwhelmed because they're disproportionately the ones working day and night to keep households afloat. So this is some interesting data that came out in May from the lockdown period. And I'm sure as we go forward, we will see lots of data coming over. I'm sure there'll be hundreds of PhD students trawling through COVID data for all different reasons to get research out. So it will be interesting to see that. Now, we did speak about sort of what you do during the day is really important because it does affect what you do at nighttime as well in terms of sleep. And this graph here shows it really nicely. So the top half being daylight hours from 6 in the morning right through to 6 in the evening, with the bottom half being night. And this is generally how most people operate. So this kind of little clock will move left and right depending on your chronotype. Like we said, owl or lark chronotype. And so you might want to schedule time in here in the morning, for example, when we're during highest alertness for team meetings, decision making, or working on complex tasks. This might be the best time to do it. Whereas you might want to avoid this part here between 12 noon and 12:30, because that's going to be at circadian law. And similarly as well, if you want to get out and exercise and you want to, have your workout and you want to get a PB, well, maybe here in the evening is the best time, because we see this is the greatest cardiovascular efficiency and muscular strength here in the evening. So, not to say that going to the gym in the morning is extremely bad, but if you want to hit those PBs and you want to run faster or lift heavier, this might be the time to do it. Also as well, you see here between 6 and 9 o'clock, this is generally a period known as the forbidden zone. This is probably the hardest time to sleep for a human. And this is at the period of sunset. You get the highest blood pressure and the highest body temperature. You may have experienced this if you've been at work all day and you're extremely tired and you say, right, when I get home this evening, I'm just going straight to bed. I'm just going to have dinner. I'm going to be in bed at 6:30, and then you're driving home. You start whistling, you feel good, and you think, wow, work made me really tired and made me feel like crap. The further I get away from work, the better I feel. Well, it's actually not that. It's actually you're hitting this forbidden zone. It's the hardest time. And this is basically what anthropologists believe is a kind of a hang up from our circadian biology to times when we did live in a cave, like on slide 1. And this is when all the saber-toothed tigers and other sort of creatures came out to hunt us at dusk or at sunset. We would basically become hyper vigilant, hyper alert at this time. So this can be a difficult time for us to sleep. And similarly here, it's really hard for us to stay asleep at this period here between sort of 3 and 6 o'clock in the morning, when we have this lowest body temperature and lowest cognitive performance. So this is really the period for sleep. We see this as well on some of this data here, and this is a landmark study which many people may have seen before on blood, the relationship with lack of sleep and blood alcohol equivalency. And what that is if you've got hours of wakefulness here across the x-axis, so the longer you stay awake, basically your performance declines. It's a measure of performance. It does come back up or kicks back up, but that's a function of that circadian rhythm which we spoke about before. But in general, if you're awake for 17 hours plus and you are, driving, operating in some sort of production task, endurance athlete, you're going to have the same reaction times at this period of time after 17 hours of wakefulness as somebody that's intoxicated blood alcohol concentrate of 0.05. So you're going to display the same reaction time in decision making. And if you've been awake for 24 hours, it will be the equivalent of 0.08, which is the legal limit in the US. We also see with sleep loss as well. So when we talk about the hours of sleep that we need per night, and most people say to get by on 4 hours or 6 hours of sleep, and this is what happens. If we look at it, this study here by Hans van Dongen at the University of Washington, if we look over time on the x-axis, this being days down here, over time, those that got 8 hours of sleep per night had very low performance lapses, so very low, errors basically that they were making. Those of 6 hours, increased number of errors or performance lapses, and those with 4 hours per night, really poor. And you can see here as well with the trend on those that the more days you do of sleep restriction, again 4 hours sleep per night, the more that increases as well. And this is really important for those people working shift work, are at home and you are getting 6 hours of sleep per night because you're trying to work, you're trying to go to the gym, do a master's, homeschool kids, all these things will just pile up, and it's generally sleep that loses. But over time, we can see this degradation to performance occurring. A work environment, I suppose this is the perfect home office environment here on the left, and this is the expectation, and in our minds this is what we see, and this is why we have these great backgrounds like we have here behind me, because we can hide all that crazy stuff that goes on behind us, even though it's just a white wall behind me. But this is the expectation here on the left, that we look like this, but in reality many of us have offices that are crazy like this. And so if a lot of us on team meetings spun our laptop around, we'll probably see boxes, clothes and all sorts behind us. So it can be a bit crazy during the lockdown period because everybody's at home and we don't have this perfect office environment where we can go to work and basically concentrate as well. You might want to consider a few things, and this was interesting. We spoke about this with a company recently, and lots of people were complaining about being basically lethargic and not sleeping very well. And one of the things lots of them did was actually move their desks to an area of natural light. So at home was moving towards natural light, not being in a garage or, you know, in a kind of a bunker room which it had very low levels of light, or opening up the blinds as well during the day. So getting as much light as possible. If we look here to the right, we can see the lux levels, you know, from indoor lighting to, you know, basically getting light from outside. So the more you can increase that lux, the better it's going to be for your sleep and wake pattern. So exposure to light during the day is really important, as we said over and over again. So try not to work at night as well if possible. Obviously things happen and we have to, you know, kind of put the foot to the floor sometimes and get things done. But if you can as well, take regular breaks throughout the day as well. Plan on some activity as well if permissible. Go outside. I think most people now in Australia will be in a period where they and have been through the kind of restrictions or lockdown periods where they could go outside. So the more you can go outside, the better it's going to be. I think many of us have seen a lot of people using parks and being outdoors at this time. And what's interesting is that some of the big data coming out of the US and the sleep research is actually showing that sleep has improved during COVID overall for most people, and that's been a relationship with basically being outside more and more. So like we say, with work environment, the brighter the better. Airflow and temperature as well. This can be difficult if you're sharing a house with somebody or at home, because generally there will be a difference with males and females, and this may occur in the office as well. So men generally will like a cooler in the office, where women would like it warmer, and so you just need to be able to have an area that you can control. Noise as well, conversation with colleagues. So working at home, this can be quite taxing on people with the constant meetings and Zoom and Teams and so on, and background noise being on as well. So being respectful of that for other people when you're working at home, but also to minimize those noises and distractions as well. And this is where the team rules and will help about having meetings during a certain period of time. So you're not just constantly sitting at a desk all day doing meeting after meeting after meeting. I've come across some companies that have done 12 hours per day of just basically meetings, and they've been using Teams to kind of just work all day together. So it's nearly like a monitoring program. It's quite bizarre. So muscular activity, walking or stretching will help as well. Mental stimulation, so taking breaks to increase your alertness. Well, all these things will definitely help. Like we said as well, with movement, incidental exercise and movement, such as traveling to and from work, is going to be reduced. So we do see a lot of people's daily activity has been reduced. There's a temptation to work beyond normal hours. So we need to be mindful of this as well. And then activity or long periods of sitting down. Whereas work, you're moving from room to room, you're going to meetings, maybe going outside and getting a coffee, and you're getting an incidental movement throughout the day. And that can be as much as, you know, that can be up to 10,000 steps for some people who may walk partly to work and back and so on. So it's just really being mindful of that when you are having those periods of work at home, to maybe increase that movement. And using like even a phone with a step counter, you know, any sort of wearable device that will give you this is always helpful, or to set yourself a target and to make time for exercise during the day as well. Now, if you are an amateur athlete or even an elite athlete, we see that, you know, insufficient sleep impairs motivation, basically reduces your strength, such as leg strength, sprint performance, and muscle glycogen. But whereas adequate sleep improves these things as well. So we do a lot of work with West Australian Institute of Sport with research around this area, and it's definitely true with these athletes who basically sleep more to generally perform better. Sleep extension, where, you know, sleep extension or increase of sleep duration per night improves performance as well. The challenges you might have during the COVID period or even post will be equipment and space. And we see a lot of people becoming very innovative with gyms being closed down or restrictions at this period. Or opportunity to participate with others. We know as well that from a mental health perspective, exercise with others at this time is very important. And when that's been reduced as well, many people have been negatively impacted by that. But it's been great to see people doing fitness classes on Zoom, or, you know, outdoor activities now have recommenced and with smaller groups. Maintaining an exercise regime will help with your sleep duration and sleep quality, and improves the alertness throughout the day as well. And also as well, if we can keep our weight in check and keep our BMI in normal ranges, this will help with chronic diseases as well. So we know that, you know, increased weight leads to a number of negative long-term health impacts. And like we said as well, with obstructive sleep apnea, we know that the bigger we are, the more potential prevalence we have of developing obstructive sleep apnea, particularly with people with a BMI over 30, although a crude measure, but generally people over 30 BMI have a 90% chance of developing obstructive sleep apnea. So one of the best ways you can reduce your risk is by keeping your weight in check, and also as well with other things such as cancer, hypertension, and so on. Now, just be careful that physical activity prior to bed will affect your sleep, because we will increase cortisol levels within the body, and this may delay the onset of melatonin into the body for sleep. So in general, I would recommend that people do not exercise within 3 hours of your intended bedtime. So if you want to go to bed at 11 p.m., that's the time you want to go to sleep at. Generally, you shouldn't really exercise after 8 p.m. because it's just going to promote wakefulness. So if we look at sleep and anxiety, so anxiety is often experienced as a distressing thought paired with negative emotion, associated with arousal, and insomnia and other types of sleep disturbances can be both a consequence of anxiety. So a number of people who have anxiety often basically have these troubles with sleep, whether it be falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up early. And like we said, with insomnia, those 3 different types. And so it's really important as well. The opposite of that is true as well. If we don't get enough sleep, it can increase anxiety as well. So there's definitely a relationship between sleep and mental health and with anxiety. If we look at some of the extreme ends of the mental health data in the US from Michael Gradner and friends there in the US, and I was speaking to Michael about this recently. He was actually on my podcast, Sleep for Performance, where we spoke about mental health, particularly in athletes. But we see in America, there's been some very, interesting data, as you can see here on the screen, with an increase in suicide rates and possible roles, financial hardship, pain, disease, and social isolation. And what's interesting is when I spoke to Michael about this was before the COVID-19 restrictions or lockdowns, and definitely 2 out of those has been in the forefront of a lot of people's minds over the last few months. So it's really important that we consider these things for our family and friends. And as we can see there in that data as well, is that the more it goes on, the greater the chance, of unfortunately the suicide rate increases. So it's just something to be mindful at these times as well when we're checking in with teammates and friends and family. We also see as well sleep has a relationship with cognitive performance and decline. So you can see here on these graphs as well in men and women, it's broken out. So generally, if you're getting somewhere between 7 to 8 hours per night, you're not going to have that cognitive decline in performance. But also as well, if you're sleeping too much on the opposite end of the spectrum, down the end of these x-axes, you can see it increases the cognitive decline as well, or performance as well. So more data again to show that somewhere between 7 to 9 hours is really the optimal time where we should be sleeping as adults. So for many people, the COVID situation has been disruptive. Like we said, it may lead to new challenges or may benefit some people, but it's really important that we have a schedule throughout this time and going forward as well to minimize stress, and as much as possible, I would say, get outside and reduce that social isolation. Protect your sleep, make time for sleep. We make time for work, we make time for exercise, but having a sort of a schedule around sleep is really important. Keep a regular schedule as well, or find a way to get bright light in the morning. So protect your sleep, but also protect your mental health. Give yourself the space and time you need to process things. Relaxation is an active process as well. We don't always have to be going 110%. And I know some people who know me would say that's a bit rich coming from me, but I have to learn it as well. And connect with people. Many people have been connecting on Zoom calls, team calls. There's been all sorts of things happening for socializing, so avail of those. We have seen some interesting data as well recently as well, which was published in The Economist, where calls to Lifeline are up by 25%. Beyond Blue has seen an increase of 40% as well since the pandemic. So again, if you are requiring support, there's a number of numbers there and links that you can reach out to and contact them for support in this area as well. So coming up towards the end, alcohol is another one as well. Unfortunately, we've seen a big increase in alcohol during the COVID-19. Approximately 30% of Australians were drinking every single night during the restrictions or the lockdown period. So there's a big increase in alcohol. Whilst alcohol might help you to get to sleep, it's going to basically affect your ability to stay asleep. So you'll fall asleep, but it'll cause more awakenings and fragmentation. And 70% of Australians said they were drinking more than usual since this outbreak as well. So, you know, not wrong with having a couple of drinks, but if you can avoid it prior to bed, it's definitely going to help. And similarly with caffeine, you know, caffeine is great. I'm a big coffee advocate myself, but it does basically promote wakefulness, promotes alertness, and this is all going to basically impact your ability to fall asleep at night. So you can negatively affect your ability to fall asleep. So in general, we would say to people, you know, caffeine has got a half-life between 4 to 6 hours. So when you take caffeine, it takes about an hour to peak, 4 to 6 hours of a half-life. So if you're consuming caffeine at roughly 5 p.m., it's going to be somewhere 11 or 12 o'clock at night before that's out of your system. So this can all negatively impact your ability to fall asleep and stay asleep as well. So avoid caffeine in those 4 hours before bed. This is a slide from some data we had published a few years ago. Time across the x-axis here. This was in Super Rugby. And we can see here that pre-game caffeine. So athletes were taking caffeine. This was the game time. Extremely high levels of caffeine after the game. And that's basically because they were consuming caffeine before the game and throughout the game, but they weren't getting the ergogenic effect. So what was happening was generally they would fall asleep, you know, around this time, around, you know, between 11 and half 11 most nights. But because of the increased level of caffeine on game night and the stimulation of playing a game and the exposure to bright light, it was basically an average of 20 past 2 in the morning before they fell asleep. And then they were awake again at 7 o'clock in the morning because of the habitual sleep and wake schedule that they had. So they were incurring a big sleep loss on the night of a game, and primarily got to do with their caffeine strategy. So the caffeine that they were consuming before the game actually wasn't kicking in till after the game. So it was a complete mistiming of caffeine. So in summary, allow at least 8 or 9 hours period to achieve 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Have a daily routine for work hours. Seek natural light. Make time for exercise up to an hour a day, preferably outdoors as well. So you can combine a few of these together. Ensure you connect with others. Take time away from social media. So this might involve maybe going for a run with a few people early in the morning or in the evening for an hour. That's always helpful. Kind of killing 2 birds there with 1 stone. Reduce caffeine or eliminate alcohol consumption. Eliminate consumption after 2 p.m. and plan in some alcohol-free days as well, and reduce your alcohol consumption because it's quite easy to get into that habit over time. Some resources, you can go to the Sleep Health Foundation. They've got some excellent fact sheets and tips over there. So lots of stuff there you can just download in PDF. So I definitely recommend going over there and perusing that information. You can also go to my website, Sleep for Performance, over here. I've got a TEDx talk there from a few years ago, a few other little media clips, it's a podcast, free downloads, that's all there. And you can go over to Melia's Consulting, my consulting business, where we got some blogs, other stuff there. So this is very industrial focused consulting, but everything is free there to access. And Sleep for Performance, which is on most podcast platforms, iTunes podcast app, Spotify, Stitcher, all of those. I think there's might be 75 episodes up there now. So everything from people working in industry to mixed martial arts to all sorts, and we got a bunch of new episodes coming out. So you get at least 1 episode a month there, and that again, that's all free as well. And Sleep for Performance, and you can contact me through any of those platforms as well if you have any questions. All right, speaking of dribbling on Teams too much, I think I went too long there. So I hope some of that information was helpful, and so we can open up maybe to some questions. So we got one here, which is from Nikki. What are your thoughts about a dog sharing your bed? Also late nights watching TV in bed. So the first one, dog, I presume you're speaking about an animal. I'm a failed comedian as well as a scientist. The answer would be no, do not have pets in the room. Seen this with individual people before. The dogs causing lots of disruption and disturbances throughout the night. you may not even be aware of it. So I would say 100% take that dog out of the room. It's not going to help. Yeah. And that's the first part. Late nights watching TV in bed. Nikki, you're killing me with these. No, again, 100%. No TVs in the room, ideally, and definitely not lying there watching TV till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Try and keep TV out of the room if possible, including laptops watching Netflix. You know, some people go, I don't have a TV in my room, but I bring the laptop in. You're still watching a show till 2 o'clock in the morning. This bright light and this stimulating activity is going to promote wakefulness. Now, that being said, I'd rather you sat there and watched a boring episode of, I don't know, Gogglebox or Neighbours, as opposed to getting all hyped up watching Love Island or one of these shows, or you were sitting there reading an industrial engineering textbook, because so it's just as much about the activity as well. So if possible, no TV in the room. Maybe, Nikki, you're looking for the answers to this question for ammunition to another person, so this could be helpful. I hope I answered your question there. We have another one here from Anonymous. That's an interesting name. Do you have any tips on COVID stress keeping you awake at night? I think a lot of what I discussed in this today will help. So I definitely start with those, you know, getting that regular exercise, taking those breaks. The other one as well, which you might want to check out my podcast, is I had a couple of people on speaking about meditation. So I had a Buddhist monk on talking about meditation, and I also had a clinical psychologist, Melissa Ree, on talking about meditation. This can be helpful as well. And I think if this is going on for a long period of time, then you might want to consider, you know, counseling or clinical psychology or whatever it might be to basically help you work through that stress and to get through the root cause of it. And like I said in the data today, a lot of stress can be coming from different sources, whether it be financial, isolation, you know, work, whatever it might be. So yeah, I think consider some of the things we've had in the presentation today, and yeah, take those into account. Next question from another anonymous. What are the most exciting developments in research in sleep and fatigue in the moment? Oh, that's a good question. I'm so wrapped up in giving this presentation, I don't know what's going on. Well, I think some of the interesting stuff that I have seen lately is probably something that we're going to put in for a grant for, actually, which is looking at individual sleep and wake models. So whilst we know that people, you know, we say in general people need 7 to 9 hours sleep. In general, people, you know, a group of people are owls, a group of people are larks. But I think now there's some really interesting research getting into looking at the individual sensitivities of light. And I think that's some of the really cool things, because how I behave and my sensitivity to light might be very different than how you behave. And so, like, I know I'm very sensitive to light, so I need sunglasses nearly all year round, where other people are just never have sunglasses on, but I, you know, really sensitive to light, and even sensitive to indoor light. So I would never have, like, you know, lots of bright light on at home. So I think that's really interesting, is this impact with light is an interesting area. There's some interesting work coming out of UWA as well, where they're working with computer scientists, where basically they can take a picture of the face and using machine learning with the distances like between, you know, your ear and your nose and the shape of your jaw, whatever it might be, they can predict with a high degree of accuracy the potential prevalence of you having obstructive sleep apnea. And that's quite interesting research that's coming out as well. So they're probably the two off the top of my head that I think are really interesting. And probably the final one in industry would be, we're doing some really cool stuff with a ECU PhD student, Gemma Maisie, looking at sleep, wake and performance in fly in, fly out mining operators. And so you think that would be done really well and published. And whilst there's been lots of kind of consultancy work done, there's been very little actual research studies done. So that's quite interesting. Okay, just see if we've got any more questions. What can I do when I'm awake for an hour or two during the night? So my advice, if you're lying in bed for more than a half an hour, is to get up. Is to don't lie there, you know, looking at the ceiling or the back of your hand. Get up and do something different. Maybe read a boring novel, you know, stretch, try to meditate. for a half an hour, whatever it might be, but don't just lie there. You may also want to consider if you're napping during the day. So if you're napping during the day, you're lowering that drive for sleep, that homeostatic drive for sleep. So I would stop the naps during the day and see if that can make you feel more sleepy at night and increase the amount of sleep that you're getting. That would be another one to look at as well. If that problem keeps persisting, I would recommend going and seeing a sleep physician or a clinical psychologist who specializes in sleep. On this topic as well, if you're having a lot of problems with sleep, I would urge people to, go to a GP and get a referral. Don't just get on the sleep medication bandwagon, because sleep meds basically, the efficacy of sleep medication wears off after about 10 days. So you need to go to someone that's actually properly trained as a sleep and respiratory physician or a clinical sleep psychologist, or, someone who specializes in sleep and performance, whatever your need might be. But definitely don't lie there for hours on end. Gail asks, I wonder if after employing your suggestion sleepiness is still a problem, is it possible that natural remedies such as valerian, lemon balm and magnesium phosphate might rejig the pattern in the short term? So this is an interesting one. So there is lots of natural supplements out there that will basically help. I'm not all over the literature on the natural supplements. I know valerian, people say it does help. And look, if it does help, I know there's been studies looking at like lavender and lavender scented pillows and eye pillows and all that. And it basically does help people relax. And if that helps, that's great. Magnesium is really good for people with restless legs during the day or periodic leg movement disorder at nighttime. That's really good for that, or people who do lots of exercise. So magnesium can help with that. But these things will not help rejig the pattern, so to speak, around your sleep-wake patterns. And if you have sleepiness during the day, and you continue to have this, it's basically because you're not getting enough sleep. You may have one of those 70 sleep disorders. So I would urge you to go and see somebody about that. And again, it would depend on the type of problem you have. And so again, refer down the right pathway. So yeah, you may need to get some extra sleep, extra help to achieve that sleep. And like we said, one in 4 Australians can have a problem or an issue as well. So another anonymous, I used to listen to music for 1 to 1.5 hours to put myself to sleep every night. Does music affect the quality of my sleep, my brain, etc.? Don't know, depends. I haven't seen any definitive studies on this, not that I was looking for them, but I haven't seen anything. I'm a fan of listening to kind of talk back radio or podcasts at night that are kind of low key myself. It helps me fall asleep, it kind of relaxes me. I know everybody's different with this. I suppose if you're listening to Metallica or Megadeth, it's not going to help you fall asleep because it's going to be blaring in your ears. So I think it depends on what you're listening to. So yeah, look, I think if you're feeling good during the day and you're sleeping between 7 to 9 hours and you feel good, I think that's okay. I think that should be fine. I haven't seen anything really on that. The only thing that comes close to mind on that, some of the studies that come out of the US is noise in suburbs. So basically there's a relationship between background noise in suburbs and sleep. So in cities or towns where there's lots of noise outside, sirens or violence, or even gunshots in some of the suburbs in the US, they've reported basically impacts the amount of sleep that they get every night. Yeah, I'd probably just recommend you put earphones in so you're not like waking up the neighbors blaring music if that's the case, but it should be fine. I think that might be all the questions we had. So that's great. Yeah, so thanks very much, guys, for listening. Hope that was informative. Like I say, check out some of those free resources. And if you have any more questions or you want some direction on some stuff, you can just email me through those websites and it'll come through anyway. So thank you very much.